Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the channel.
Yes,
How you
thanks for
doing?
having me. Yeah,
So I just want to remind the audience, there are links in the description of this video and all the videos. I believe this is part 12 now of
yeah.
the video series that we've been doing. Um, so please click the link and that will take you to John's website. You'll be able to sign up for his periodical, uh, sign up for a reading. So, we'll go in a little bit more detail later in the video here about exactly what that is. But please click that link. It's in the description of this video, and that will take you to his website directly. So, John, thank you again for coming on to the show. We did miss 1 week. Uh, so a lot has happened since then. So where do you want to start?
In a way, it's good that we skipped because I've been spending in the last week, I've written 23,000 words and 11 articles and I'm prepared for my next Hogue prophecy report. And of course, the usual culprits are involved: the Iranian Israeli theater and the Ukrainian theater. Um, and an interesting controversy that I try in the central reports to kind of show all sides of it because I'm not so sure if it's true, but the crazy factor that's growing in world events, that those times when you say, oh, they won't really do that. They won't really do that. Remember George Biden, no, Joe Biden had said in the early part of the conflict in Ukraine that oh, but if we did that if we started to send troops or our weapons directly shooting the Russians through the Ukrainians, that would start World War III. And now, or oh, the Poles, if they go in, if NATO actually breaks up and does a coalition of the willing and goes in on their own, then they're not in NATO anymore, even though they're NATO forces. That's how they can get involved in the fight directly with the Russians if the Russians start breaking out. No, we won't do that. We won't do that's crazy. That would be another route to World War, well, to the thermonuclear potential of this already World War III happening since February of 2022. But then they do it. They're doing it now. There's already 1,000 French, not just mercenaries, not just what they call in the military sheep dipped. Bring in a French guy in a French uniform, you sheep dip him into the brown Ukrainian uniform, and now he's a Ukrainian. There's at least 3,500 surviving mercenaries that have done that, with 7,000 already have been killed. Um, the but now it's like French flags, the real people. And there's talk about Romania moving. Like if there's a collapse of the political, I mean, this next month and the 21st of May, Vladimir Zelensky is no longer the president by law, by Ukrainian law. He didn't allow elections. In fact, the man is famous for, in the name of democracy, shutting down all opposition parties. This was before the war. So he didn't even have a national emergency to do it. I mean, he was voted in a landslide by people because he did the Servant of the People series, where he was just this teacher who ends up becoming Ukrainian president. And he said all the right things. Actually, a really good show. I've seen some of it. He was like saying, oh, we gotta be for the people. So he literally took the name of that documentary and made it a party, his party, in a real political campaign financed by one of the more influential oligarchs that run Ukraine, Kolomoisky. And he's a Jewish Ukrainian uh, guy that does that, but he also funded the neo-Nazi groups like Azov. He funded them. So it's a very strange mix. But then when I look at what's happening with Israel these days and what the kind of government that it has, and it actually kind of unfortunately, kind of a good fit. Um, so so anyway, um he won by a landslide in 2019, and then when he got in there, all the Azov people, the deep state of Ukraine, the oligarchs and all, were all basically pro neo-Nazi. They said, "Listen to us. All that stuff you did to get to be president, now you listen to us, you do a 180." And so, they basically told him, "All you just drop all of that," and he did. So the Ukrainian people, he's as unpopular with Ukrainian people as Biden is in the United States. I mean, because they felt they all got gypped. Russian Ukrainians, Ukrainian Ukrainians, they got gypped by this guy. He didn't come to make peace. He actually made the whole thing worse. Under his watch, his country's being destroyed. It's being broken up, and now the Ukrainian front, as I've long been saying on this show and other shows and writing since this war started, I said, you watch, especially of late, of a couple beginning of the year, I started talking about how by end of April, look out for end of April. That's when I thought that would be the beginning of the unraveling of the Ukrainian Eastern Front. Well, it's unraveling now. It's not a maybe. It's not, oh, the steamroller's just getting a little faster. No, it's unraveling. It's unraveling. All the Russians started really advancing much faster, breaking through Ukrainian front lines after the Ukrainians abandoned their posts and some of the units in Avdiivka, and the city that they defended for 2 years, it dropped in 2 days to the Russians. So there are large-scale surrenders going on. The Ukrainian army is getting exhausted. It's not being led well. They fight like tigers. I mean, I'm often reminded of a story that gives me chills when I heard it. There was an incident earlier in the war. You know, there was a time when there were three in the Russian world before the nationalists took over Ukraine in 1991, and then the Nazis took over in 2014. There was an understanding that goes back to Ruski, the Rurik, and the beginning of the Slavic world of Russia, that basically looks at three core Slavic Russian groups that are the center of the Russian world. The one is the Muscovite Russians, Novgorod Muscovite Russians, which we kind of just call the Russians. The other are the White Russians, the Belarusians, and the third are the Ukrainian Russians. And because they're all sprouted as different derivatives of the same source from Kiev, which is the current capital of Ukraine, is actually the birthplace of the Russian world, the Russian society and culture. And the problem is that so these guys were fighting. There was the Ukrainians. They were surrounded. I think it was in a forest. They were surrounded by Russians, or in one of those tree-lined forests between fields that are really dictate the battlefields of a lot of Ukraine. And the Russians, in a little lull, the gunfire, were saying, because they're dropping these guys one by one. They said, "Look, surrender, Reykjavik, Reykjavik. We won't harm you." Which is true. The Russians have been really good at they even have a radio frequency where they have it on, and if you want that, you call that frequency, and the whole battalion just did that the other day in Bitchute, when the Russians cut through the line so much they got surrounded. And I saw this morning a terrible sight. I saw one of the parts of the battlefield, and it looked like something right out of Matthew Brady's photographs from the Civil War, heaps of people strewn. And all these Ukrainians were just blown away by artillery and just covering the field in their defense areas. And the Russians are walking through it, and they can hear how they're kind of feeling sad, how tragic it is. Well, anyway, the guys rushing, yelling at the Ukrainians, surrender, don't die, surrender, we'll take care of you, you'll be fed, everything will be fine. They got to yell back, and the guy said in Russian, Russians don't surrender. So the guys cast a sigh and they fought on, and they all died. They fought to the end. So the only problem the Ukrainian soldier has is his leadership and the fact that he's being used, exploited by NATO to have his behind killed so that the NATO people don't have to do it. Even you have even the senator of South Carolina literally saying, let's fight till the last Ukrainian. He doesn't seem to connect what that means. Or when Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, was asked, well, what do you want to do in this war? Well, we want to harm the Russians. We want to kill a lot of them, and we want to harm them so that they'll have a revolution and overthrow Vladimir Putin. The silliness about that is that if Vladimir Putin agreed, the way that he would be overthrown is what they're expecting this is going to do. It's actually making him more and more popular. It's going to be a shock for a lot of the audience that hasn't seen me much, not so much for the veterans of this show, that most Russians think that Vladimir Putin is too soft on the West, that in fact, he admitted that he was naive to his people. I saw it. He was like asked on national TV with his reporter. He said, what do you think are your mistakes? And you'll never hear that in the Western press. I mean, imagine somebody just really just saying, okay, and in a war, you're a leader. It's like, well, FDR, how did you screw up? Well, Winston Churchill, what was the issue that's your fault? Well, they asked him, and it was amazing his response. I mean, you always watch body language because bodies never lie. Usually, if somebody would be defensive, he gets stiff. Well, I haven't made a mistake, or there'd be, but his immediate thing was he was listening like he does with his nose down, kind of like a meditative hobby, the house dwarf. And then when he's asked that question, he kind of, what were your mistakes? And he kind of went, oh, you're trying to, where to begin? He rolled his eyes and he was like, well, and then he said, I'm naive. I was naive. I thought I like the West. I like the culture. I speak fluent German. When I worked in the in intelligence during the Cold War there in Eastern Germany, and I think I gave for years I tried to convince them to do things, and I just couldn't stop. I never wanted to go to war, but there was nothing left. They gave me nothing left. They gave the Russian people nothing left. I mean, and so the only thing left was, especially when they were getting ready to start, when it was clear that all of this maneuvering and negotiation was done just to let NATO train the Ukrainian army so that it would be a unit of NATO, openly admitted by some of the leaders, which you won't hear on the Western press, but it's all out there. And that's what Hogue prophecy reports do. They give you the alternative sources and their sources and their sources so that you can actually, I mean, don't walk into anything blindly believing or blindly disbelieving. That is the sign of immaturity and infantilism. That's the sign of, I mean, if you just follow your beliefs, because belief is well, somebody's telling me something and I'm going to put my blind faith into that being true. Go in and seek to know, not to believe. And you won't be able to do that unless you unplug yourself from your more familiar sources of news and stress test them, as you should stress test me. You'll never hear the mainstream media say what I'm saying to you, but you will constantly hear it from the alternative, or what I call the free speech media, that is growing exponentially. I'm a part of it. And they will say, look, don't believe me, check it out. Now that requires what's happened when this country was created. People were far more politically engaged than they are now, because they lived in a world where if you didn't make sure the people that you elected don't do things for you, you might die. It was a harder time. There could be a war. I mean, we live in up to this point, we've lived in a world where, we just get lost in our little lives, and we just don't really want to engage politically. But the problem is that, what is a nation but a political concept? And if you kind of say, well, I'll just let it roll on its own, I'll just do my own thing because somebody else will do it for me. Well, what if all the people are pretty much looking over their shoulders and say, well, somebody else will do it for me? I mean, it's like one of my favorite stories, which sometimes I use to remind people to help support the work that I do, is a lot of people are like sitting on the fence, and they're all thinking, well, somebody will help it out. And what happens is nobody does, because they're all waiting. It's just like everybody's waiting for who's going to be the first penguin to slip off the iceberg, and they're all going to check to see if the leopard seal gets him or not. And so they're all waiting. And then one finally slips off and goes in, and then he doesn't show up, and all the penguins are going, well, we always knew that was what's going to happen. And then like 20 minutes later, he shows up. you know. So this is a real story. I might have told it before here, but it's a real story. It's actually documented in the annals of Emperor Akbar of India, who was one of the great Mughal emperors of the Indian kingdom in the 16th century, around the same time Nostradamus was alive. And he's responsible for creating the Taj Mahal. And he was a very much a Renaissance man during the time, though the Renaissance was happening in Europe. His court was rich with great musicians, poets, thinkers, and even one of the best court jesters in history, Burble. Um, and he comes up a lot in Akbar's annals. For instance, to give you an example, there was a scene where suddenly Akbar, um, maybe Burble did something wrong or something, but he hauled off and slapped him across the face. Now Burble's response was not to go or shock or he was slapped in the face, and he turned around, and the person nearest to him, he slapped him in the face. And they said, keep it going. He said, keep it going, don't stop. And so that guy kind of went, oh, okay. And he went and slapped the other guy. And then so what happened over the next week across the entire capital is the slap was being slapped all across the capital. And then one day, Akbar is coming to enjoy one of his concubines. And as he comes in, ready for a nice night, she slaps him across the face. I said, what did you do? He said, well, I did what everybody's doing when, it was like, get slapped, don't get shocked, pass it on. I passed it on, and it looks like it's come back to its source. That actually happened. So that's one of the many stories, but the one that I would apply for, helping people understand that this needs to be helped, because we don't have the big corporations running the news, our news. We're all shoestring. We're all doing it. Uh, and a lot of the people that used to be well paid, who can't tolerate being on mainstream media anymore, they are also hand to mouth just like us. But we love what we're doing. We feel it's patriotic. We feel it's human and helpful that people really find out what Russia really is like, what China really is like, not what these people try to do on CNN, Fox, the legacy media, BBC, and all that. Is we're here to think for you because you're too busy with your little life. We're here to think for you. And it reminds me of when CNN, when Ted Turner left CNN and it was being taken over by a corporation. There was this very creepy ad. They thought it was wonderful, but they were literally talking like that and said, you know, in the world, this is the mid 90s, you know, in the world, there's so many things to know, and there's just too much to take in. Isn't it nice that you know us, that we can tell you what it's all about? You know, it's like we know, we'll do the thinking for you. You know, and isn't it nice to know somebody who knows? And then my response to that was, yeah, Big Brother knows.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Big Brother knows.
This is so much like 1984, and
Yeah,
they're famous for and CNN's famous phrase that Cuomo used to say
yeah,
is the news you need to know.
yeah. Which is another way, like,
It's like, like
I'm
we will
presuming
tell
you
you
know
what
nothing, and
we
I
will tell you what
and
you need to
you know,
know.
and then I put out my big Q-tip and stick it up my nose. Yeah,
Right. I
you
just,
know.
and then
And I
how,
come
yeah,
from, I
right.
worked with these people. I
Yeah. I just,
boxed all of them.
and the sad thing, what there is there is change that's going on. You're a little bit older than I, but there we have a similar experience in America. And we saw television, the bunny ear television, three stations, local stations, right? And then the move towards cable, right? And the 24-hour news cycle, right? And then the internet, and then YouTube, and the flourishing of channels. So there's been this arc of change in how news is propagated in the world, and in the United States, how it's consumed. What I have seen, um, I don't want to say certain terms because I want to keep the video up here, but I'll use the term crisis of 2020 as the
Mm,
term to discuss this era. So the crisis in 2020, at that time period, the what we'll call the legacy media, right, was still, their model was still based on cable, right? And a lot of channels started to flourish covering this crisis in a more alternative way through YouTube.
yeah,
I
because
was
they were
one of
telling
them.
the
You were
real
one of them,
things.
right? Right, right. But what happened in the post crisis of 2020 was many of these outlets, the legacy media, is starting to shrink, right? Right.
Exponentially,
Right. Their viewership is going down, not
double
only
digit.
on right, not only on the actual show, but also number of hits on their websites are going down.
Yeah,
Wall
all of
Street Wall Street Journal is going down, the FT is going down, the Financial Times is going down, Bloomberg is
it.
going down.
Berg.
Right. So they're all, so what has happened now is that they're starting to lay off certain um, famous newscasters, right? That maybe, said certain things at certain times where they became too radioactive. And
Don
now,
Lemon.
well, yeah, I was going to say it was Don Lemon, and I also Tucker, but Tucker, was saying certain things that Fox didn't like. So, but what happened is that they ended up moving into this alternative realm,
Yeah.
and some of them, not all of them, but Megan Kelly is starting to get her foot,
Yeah. She's found a
situated
new
in that
life.
realm, right?
Judge Napolitano. I never
Right,
watched him when he was on Fox.
right.
He's mellowed out, and now that he's free of it, Judging Freedom is a great show. I suggest everybody watch it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I agree. But what's happening is that the part of the legacy media has left or has been forced. They left on their own volition, or they were forced to leave.
Yeah.
And then some just decided to do nothing, not to, cover. Some decided to try this whole set up a channel and build their own little network kind of thing, like Tucker did.
Yeah.
And some of them are becoming successful, some are not. The ones that are becoming successful, I think they're sucking up some of the viewership that some of the smaller channels like myself used to have.
Mm.
So there's this, my concern here is the legacy media is slowly creeping into the alternative media realm, slowly.
Yeah.
It starts with the Tuckers that were kind of the black sheep of the family, right?
Right.
Of Fox News. They get a crowd, then all of a sudden the rest of the legacy media decides to start moving into this realm. So this is part of the reason why I think YouTube is slowly dying for channels like myself. But other platforms like Rumble is starting to become more beneficial.
Yeah.
How long that stays, I don't know. It's like Rumble, Bitchute,
Yeah.
Brighteon, they are kind of like 10 years ago what maybe YouTube was.
Yeah.
And so so we're kind of like moving we're moving into a new realm. People move to GETTR and Truth Social
Yeah.
because Twitter, before Elon Musk bought
Right.
them, there was a lot of censorship.
Well, and
But
there was
now with
that new thing that was kind of a maroon symbol, and it was going to be the place where conservatives could not get banned like they were in Facebook and other places.
right, right,
And
right,
just novelty or something, like, I don't know. Anyway, they killed that. And then of course,
right,
yeah. So
right. So
go
so
ahead.
Elon Musk gets into
Uh,
buying Twitter, turns it into X, which
Huge
right,
change.
that's a huge, yeah. And so now a lot of the eyeballs that were in Rumble or channels like this on YouTube, those eyeballs are now moving massively to X. So X is morphing into something beyond
Yeah.
what Twitter used to be. What that will be, I'm not really sure. Some
It's
sort of
an
hybrid,
evolution in
maybe.
process.
Yeah, but something's changing. That legacy media, the point I'm making is legacy media is moving away from cable and getting into the platform of YouTube, while the ones that used to have channels and had a lot of viewership in YouTube is moving to either Rumble or X. And so there's this movement that's taking place. There's this larger movement that's happening. Now,
Yes, but
how it
I
all
tell you,
plays out, I'm not really sure.
well,
I'm not
it plays out. It's not a place that's going to be that welcoming to all the bullshit artists and lying people of the mainstream media. If they think they can move that into the alternative media, they're going to be in a place where there's all kinds of people nailing them for it. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, it is more, you get more direct reactions and responses
right.
from people on X or in the alternative media than you do. There, this whole kind of ivory tower kind of idea that uh, we know what to tell you. I mean, I'll tell you the big demographic that Biden has lost, and the mainstream media has lost, is Gen Z. Gen Z is discovering alternative media. Across this nation, something's happening that hadn't happened since Kent State and all the anti-war protests across the universities of the United States. It suddenly exploded, triggered by the bald-faced genocide of the Zionist government in Gaza. And these kids. I was around when all that was happening in the late 60s, early 70s. And it's exactly the same. It's like, and these people really are no more war, stop these forever wars, stop the genocide. And the Gen Z, unlike their parents so much, the new millennials, the Gen Zs are politically active and like they were in the 60s. And I would also say that from my understanding as a forecaster, that I remember on your show just the last 6 months, I've been telling people how when Pluto starts moving out of its long time orbit through Capricorn, which created the structure of democracy, what the democracy really didn't start spreading over the world until it moved into Aquarius, where it is now. And then the catalyst for spreading it was the French Revolution. And that Pluto return is coming in 2034, 2036, where it'll return to the birth point of the French Revolution. But it's already starting. I've seen there's been a shift from 2023 into 2024 that if those legacy people want to play games on the alternative media and pretend that it's not there like they try in their legacy shows, I don't think a lot of those people will make it over. They don't have the mindset. It's like saying, well, people who just wanted to stay with horses and buggies never went to the car. It's kind of not a great metaphor, but it's like there's, you know, there are certain things, or like, okay, like my generation, the baby boomers, don't, for better and worse, live through their phones. You know, they have landlines. Something like that. So I think I think that and of course, I will just say up front, like I was just starting this show with, about how things that people said they never do, they do. Things that, the kind of stuff that destroys something that's fresh and good, that could come into the alternative media. But the alternative media, and that is why a lot of these legacy and power circles in the world are trying to create laws that literally will shut the internet down. And it's the media's part of it because of the propagandists of this. So I'm seeing, that the legacy medias are getting on side of all those people who want to create new laws that could all over the world silence the internet. Now, what that will cause is revolution across the world. It's too late for that. And the other thing too is that you know um, a lot of people are now starting to wake up, and it's just beginning. And there's going to be a lot more. I mean, in a way, I do see ultimately that this period of time will come that alternative media is actually the new mainstream media. But it will have to have the qualities of that last Pluto orbit that began 248 years ago this year in Aquarius now. That because the people in the French Revolution, they were literate politically. They realized that politics mattered. Um, uh, it was also unlike our revolution. Same thing happened, but I mean, how many people even have the musculature of thought to do what the founding fathers and mothers of America did? Rebel against the British Empire, which none of them originally wanted to do, but the British Empire gave them no respect and didn't treated them terribly, to the point where people that were staunch British Empire citizens, like John Adams, George Washington, all these people, they had to go. The only option left for us, since they won't talk to us, they won't deal with us as human beings, is to leave. And it was not easy. And it killed 35,000 American citizens in the American Revolutionary War. They lived in a time when life was shorter and more intense in a lot of ways because people on average didn't live long lives. And they all had a memory of why they were there and not in Europe anymore. 30 Years War, where your king, if he decides to be a Protestant one day and after being a Catholic, he forces all of you to be Protestants. If you look at the Bill of Rights, it is a variation on a theme of all the reasons they wanted to make in law defending citizens' rights, all the reasons that were lived by these people who left Europe to avoid this tyranny. And when the tyranny was really pushed on them, I mean, we were kind of isolated from European stuff by then, but when the empire reached out and said, you're going to do this. Now, we've gotten soft. Our revolutionary muscles are flabby. And that is because we have all taken for granted our freedoms. And even though Americans never had that great a memory of their history, this current lot of us has almost none. And, history always goes in cycles. And when people get flabby and take things for granted, they lose them. We are losing the democracy. We are not in a democracy now. It'll keep the trappings. It's like what George Orwell, no, it was the man who wrote another great thinker, the one who wrote Brave New World.
Huxley?
Yes, Huxley, close friend of D.H. Lawrence, actually helped him edit Lady Chatterley's Lover when he was dying. And Huxley had this wonderful quote, which I sometimes use in my book, where he says, the way the tyranny will happen is you'll still have your Congress, and you'll still have the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court and the president, and they'll talk about democracy just like they were before. But in fact, it's all talk. In the name of democracy, you will be living in a fascist dictatorship. And that's happening now. And I tell you, it takes guts to rise up against it. And you may end up in jail. I'm speaking about myself. I mean, you may end up dying. Because we've come into a time where it's time to man up, woman up, and deal with that. And it's time to start knowing your constitutional rights. So everybody out there who hasn't read the Constitution, read it. It's only 4,000 words or so. Read the Bill of Rights. These are not just words on a piece of paper while you live your life in TikTok and stuff like that. And oh, by the way, TikTok is being attacked because TikTok is a platform for people of all ages watching a lot of times people on TikTok describing one-on-one to everybody who's watching the situation that's happening in Canada. Canada is already a fascist state now in the name of democracy and parliament and Trudeau and the fact that the deputy prime minister of Canada is actually reared by Ukrainian Nazis. So she's fine with all this totalitarian stuff. Her grandfather used to write for Herr Goebbels of the propaganda ministry, stuff to propagate Nazism for the Ukrainians. So, and she used to dress up in the little Hitler Ukrainian youth fascist uniforms, the white shirt, blue tie, dark pants, everybody in the white shirts. I mean, I've often shown pictures of this, and they're carrying the yellow Svoboda flag, which is a Wolf's Angel. It's that weird cross that goes like that and cut in the middle. It's like this.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like this. Let's see. Maybe I shouldn't show it. Anyway.
No, I can imagine it.
Yeah, anyway, so
I think I've seen it.
it's a classic rune used by the SS. And so, I've been saying one of the longest forecast I've been warning about since the late 80s is now upon us. And I said it would start in the 2020s, and that is the return of fascism. The cycle of fascism has returned. And it is settled in some strange bedfellow homes. It's settled over Israel. It's settled over us. And in the United States and Canada, the West. And so it is the media. Here's what will happen, because it's the threat of it now is clearly seen. If the media comes over, and if even YouTube realizes that there's more money in letting people be more freely able to speak, because who's making lots of money out of X? They won't see the virtue of it. The YouTube people will see, maybe you'll see them lightening the load of all the censorship and stuff like that, because not because they're really care, but they care about the bottom line, And so, but if this current form somehow eventually gets corrupted, the people who create such an alternative media will leave it and start another alternative media of another kind. If I don't think that, well, as far as I'm concerned, it would be like CNN and Fox and all those people, if they thought they could insinuate themselves into this sphere, this public commons, that actually one of the only ones that is truly public, and it's messy, but it's free. I mean, if you don't like what you're seeing, you have the right to censor what you personally, what you do and don't want to do or see. But in a free society, you have no right to censor what you don't like and make everybody else also not see it. That's not the way of democracy. Democracy is messy. If you want the trains to run on time and everything to be clean and proper and orderly, just recreate the Third Reich again. Just create Stalin's communist Russia. And so I do think that the nature of the energy is that the people that have profited and now become habitually involved, the corporates, the 1%er people, they're classically like the aristocracy of 248 years ago. That back in the time when America was thinking about breaking away from Europe, and we gave birth to, in the Capricorn, the creation of the United States of America. And that was when the aristocratic classes, the 1% corporate people of their day, which were more blood related rather than your blue bloods. Now it's black, bottom line. Now racism is often divided by, and I said this decades ago, that it would be divided not by what your race is or your skin color. It'll be whether you have billions and whether you do not. It won't even matter what skin color you are. If you're part of the people who have most of the 1% of the world's wealth, you're a part of an aristocracy, not of blood, but of hoarding wealth and sitting on it, rather than have it be what is supposed to be a currency. And so they've gotten away with a lot of stuff. But now, especially with this astrological change, we're now entering a time where, the aristocracies of Europe used to think, oh, the peasants are never going to rebel. They're just all a bunch of cowardly people living in their mud huts, and they're never going to rebel against us. We can always do this. And then are they so surprised when it reaches a point where it will suddenly trigger a rebellion? And it usually gravitates around being poor to the point of not being able to survive, suddenly because they've ruined the economies. France ruined its economy back in the 1700s, 1780s. It was down. It can even be caused by natural disasters like climates doing weird things. For instance, the French Revolution, literally a year and a day before the storming of the Bastille, there was this thing in the French journals that I've read called the whirlwind. It was kind of like what's going on in Oklahoma and Nebraska right now. It was a huge set of tornadoes, a line of tornadoes that rampaged and marched across central France, destroying the crops. And usually it's not immediate. You don't really feel the pain of that until the harvest time and there's not enough food and the prices are too high. And so when people grow hungry, and they see all the people in the 1% in their big mansions, let them eat cake. Oh, isn't that cute? Um, there's a moment where it happens. The people rebel, and it's boom, just so everybody's like, whoa, even the people doing it, rebelling, are kind of like, wow, what just happened? We're now going this way with it, and then the things that were never imagined suddenly are happening because it's repressed. All this tyranny represses people. It represses it until finally, and it can be simple things. Usually it's the most human, simple, basic, ubiquitous things that trigger great change. I mean, it's when the cavemen and women started to grow crops and train wild animals to be their dogs and cats and horses. And it seemed like a little thing, but everything changed. Otherwise, the human race was just only about 8,000 to 10,000 people who somehow managed as this populous little population species through hundreds of thousands of years. And then suddenly we only started really spreading our seed and doing that is when we started to become civilized, which means to stay in one place in Latin, but that was huge. It changed everything. Well, we're in one of those moments of history now that could do that. I mean, Bitcoin is, in economic terms, the moment when cultivation happened. It could, in the coming century, become a completely different way of looking at money. It might be accelerated by the fact that now these oligarchic aristocrats are pressing down on us, just like King George III did. And the people, they think they can keep the people down. Well, okay, we'll control them. That we'll make sure that money that they have our digital money, that any other paper money or other things they're not going to have. Well, there's already countries that are coming up to people saying, no, we don't want this. Now they may be most likely, all too predictably, the rich may be dumb enough to poke the angry peasants at this point, thinking they're the same because they don't want to see them as they really are. This is how it always is with the power structures. They blind to this, and it happens again and again and again. And they are so surprised when they're getting their hair cut off and their hands bound and they're lowered into the guillotine for the blade to drop. Well, we're coming to that period. It'll be a rhyme, as Mark Twain said. History doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes. And I'm only stating I'm not for or against what happens. I'm just giving you the suchness of the situation. I would not like to see any violence. I would not like to see. I would like to see this happen in a peaceful way, but the forces are set again. That I have to kind of acknowledge it, even though I do not like it. I have to acknowledge it as a forecaster that the forces of violence and clashes of and revolution are upon us. And and now it's more globally happening. Revolutions used to be local, but as the world is becoming a globally aware, not globalist, but a globally aware interactions of communities of nations. I mean, the West and America being at the head, and Europe want to kind of hold on to the way it was, and they want to destroy the BRICS nations, and the rules-based order, which never tells us what the rules are because they're making them up as they go. The BRICS, watch October in this year. It's one of the most important Octobers in human history when the BRICS gather in Kazan, a Muslim state in the Russian Federation. And they will begin to work on the alternative currency measures that, so Xi Jinping, Putin, and Narendra Modi will all be there, the top bunch of the BRICS. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the Raisi of Iran, the president of Iran will be there. It's called the governance of the world majority. Now, I've talked about this. This is a new rising thing in the world majority. And how you buy and sell is this fundamental thing, just like the guys who were trying to civilize, they started to try to invent a currency, some kind of value system. Okay, how about shells? How about pepper? How about beans? And then eventually everybody agrees on a certain transaction, and it changes, it creates a whole new direction of human civilization. And the BRICS are about to, in the next few years, are going to create a system that the Bretton Woods in 1944 system were considering, and that is to create a currency that's a transactional currency that nobody's national dollar or money system controls. It is the bridge for the other systems to buy and sell and trade, using their currencies to be converted into the collective currency. Now it's still being melded, but this was actually what John Maynard Keynes, who was part of the British economist, very famous Keynesian economy, he was part of the group at Bretton Woods with the Americans and others, and they were all trying in 44. They could see they were going to win the war in about a year or two. They thought it in 44, and they said, okay, well, let's already start planning for the future. We have a world where the economy is in shambles because of this war, and America is like the last big economy standing, actually profited from it, from the luck of being separated by two vast oceans. But Europe is on its knees. Asia is on its knees. And so, but they made the grave mistake of deciding, they went for the easy way, not the challenging way to really create a new monetary system that is not nationalized. They embraced the US dollar. And that was a big mistake, because then what they did is the greed that eventually happens in conscious people is the US dollar becomes a weapon of domination. More than our nuclear weapons as a power, as a threat that people subscribe to or surrender to, the US dollar has been the very essence, the very core weapon economically that has created our kind of unique imperium that doesn't, like the older European imperiums, have armies and colonial armies and viceroys and all in all the nations that are subservient and exploited for their manpower and their cheap labor and all that. We did a thing where just we don't even plant a flag like Britain Union Jack or the French tricolor. We didn't even do that. We do it by the US dollar and giving aid. And if you go in the wrong direction, you're threatened by getting your aid lost, or you'll have to all pay it up. So it's done purely by a kind of scoundrelish business weaponized model. And until last year, there wasn't another option. So we all had to kiss the American popo and kind of smile, but inside suffering from all of this. That colonialism now, like maybe the media might try to find a new way to exploit again. Colonialism at the end of World War II looked like it was dead. And then America became a neo-colonialist financial tyranny on the world. And because its dollar, because it was the reserve currency when we dropped the gold standard for the fiat economy in 1971, we had the power to deficit spend to infinity. You know, we did have a commodity the others didn't have, Saudi oil. And so that was kind of our route into a commodity like a standard based on oil. And then the Saudis agreed to buy treasury bonds in US dollars. And so it was all fine. We were running the show. But in the last few decades, since we became a unipower after the Cold War I ended, and up to when Cold War II began in 2014, when the Americans helped Ukrainian Nazis overtake democratically elected government of Ukraine and put Nazis in its place, meaning that a whole lot of people who were part of Ukraine who were not Nazis were threatened. And a lot of them were the Russian eastern half of Ukraine. And that one thing led to another, and there was a long bloody civil war, and now this war that has widened to a proxy war between NATO using Ukraine to the last man and woman to fight the Russians. And it has not gone well. The Russians, if they wanted to kill a lot of Russians, they've only killed about 50,000. That's actually the number. But just today, it was announced that from their own counts at the Russian Ministry of Defense, and they're pretty accurate about their counts over the years, um, is now officially past 500,000 80, 583,000 dead, the Ukrainian losses in 2.3 years. Now the Russians have lost nearly, I would say it's close to 60,000 with the Russians. And I would say that imagine this. Can you imagine in the 10 years that America was in the war in Vietnam, which was such a trauma for us, and the loss of life was around 57,000 if you include the missing, or certainly dead. The Russians have burned through 60,000 Russians in 2 years. Now, the fact that the other side is actually so badly led and literally being used as cannon fodder by the West, it's really criminal what NATO is doing. And they're openly saying they're doing. If you watch the alternative news, you can hear them saying it. They don't let them say it on NBC or other things this much, but they're starting to have to, because the propaganda war has been lost. But so you're seeing the New York Times and you're seeing CNN sometimes and Fox. They're now saying the things that anybody been watching me all these years. I've been saying this before the war started. Ukraine's going to lose big. It's going to unravel, and it could start a clash between NATO, and because NATO is run by infantile people who have no reverse gear, and they're now showing it. Macron started to talk crazy talk, and he's actually chased one last few weeks ago. We were talking about him. Well, he's already put 1,000 of the 2,000 initial French in Odessa. So I'm starting to think, I guess one has to admit it, and then one can perhaps see better. But it's something I've resisted. I'm admitting it to my readers. I deep down have a hard time. I think I've got a better handle on the irrational than a lot of people I contend that I watch that I really respect, like Alexander Mercouris of the Duran, one of the best things about alternative media, and Alex Christoforou, his buddy, and they are reasonable, rational Greeks. Mercouris was born in Greece, and he's actually his aunt was one of my favorite Greeks, Melinda Mercouri, who, as I said before, I'll do my impersonation again. She's famous for her song, "Never on a Sunday, a Monday, a Tuesday, da, 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 da." She was a great actress, comedian, and a great political leader in Greece. Has also fought a fascist regime that exiled her to England and all of that. She had quite a life. quite a rich life. Anyway, so, but I've often had to say, it's like I keep seeing my Greek friends at the Duran. I call them my friends. They haven't met me yet, although they must see my furry face on some of the chat things. But anyway, the uh, everybody has this to watch. You try to, when faced with the irrational, which is the other side of reason, it's just like when order is faced by chaos, the mother of order. There, you just, there's the danger is that you just can't imagine they'll go all the way, that they have no reverse gear. There's always a there's always a hope that, since they keep talking about maybe using a nuke or two to scare the Russians if everything falls apart, that no, they're not that crazy. They're not going to do. Um, you know, Netanyahu and his cabinet, they're not actually going to take what happened on October 7th, which actually was one of the largest friendly fire incidents in military history, when the Israelis actually killed most of those 1,400 people. Uh, they didn't know it. They were immediately, helicopters came in, and they didn't know that all those people in that rave were. They thought they were all a bunch of Palestinians that broke out of the prison, because they could see the Palestinian guards running with them. And I mean, I have the footage. I showed the actual gunship, helicopter gunship footage, and they're saying in Yiddish, or no, in Hebrew, shoot here, and pop, 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 and you can see there. I recognize the costumes and stuff of the people, and it's like, but they didn't know about that. They weren't told about that. This is this huge rave with thousands of people. And so a lot of those, so most of the people that died from Israeli friendly fire.
I have a question. I have a
But
question.
I'll just finish this one bit before I get to that is, and so, I even look at Ben Gvir and Smolich and Netanyahu, and I say, are you really going to go there? No, you're not going. Can you really go there? Are you really going to go, and with all this media watching, kill 2.3 million Palestinians or throw them into Sinai by force? Maybe a little later from now, when they're already half weakened by starvation, can't really resist, when you literally just drag them over there. I mean, are you really going to do that? Well, yeah. And now I have to kind of face the fact and just be with this. Yes, that is their intention, because the Western, the West, losing 500 years of domination over the world, has so habitually believing they should be the people who take care of the jungle, as Joseph Borrell called it. We are, Europe is the garden, and the rest of the world is the jungle, and we're here to make it a garden. I mean, isn't that classic variation on a theme of colonial white man's burden bunk going on? Well, we're losing that now. We're now going to be on the sidelines of history, and I don't know if American leadership or European leadership. I do know that people can be fed up with it and change, but the people that are trying to make a police state are trying to suppress this change, even in their own people. And 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 they might just believe that they can start even a nuclear war and win it. And even Israel's leadership might believe that they can openly, brazenly kill all the Palestinians. And even if mass graves with 700 people have been discovered, and they're still pulling them out, and a lot of the people were stripped naked, and all they were wearing were binds on their hands, and this is just right out of the Holocaust of the 1940s. And it's by the Orthodox Jewish soldiers, that compromise they made, where the Orthodox Jews had to serve, so they have their own units. And there again, I mentioned before, Biden was going to rightfully sanction them economically, all of them personally, for the terrible atrocities they are doing. And then just the other day, he backed off. So this wanting to do the right thing, oh, we can't ever do that, and then he does it. There is this in this next, I talk about it. It's already 1 month is gone. Now we have another 5 months to get through it. This 6 month period is really the most dangerous and reckoning in human history, and we're we may find at the brink, when everybody's gotten to the brink, maybe that will be the shock that brings these people back. The other possibility is always that the people who act so aggressive, when they're really faced with the Samson option in their minds, will they become what I hope they are, bully wimps? Because, okay, you're going to go there. The world doesn't like what you're doing. You're going to unleash your nuclear bombs and take the whole region down with you, as if you're Samson taking everybody down with you. But do you have in that moment Samson's righteousness? I don't think so. I mean, Samson knew, he was aware he sinned and made a mistake, and no, these people sound more like Hitler in the bunker saying, "Where's Combat Group Steiner?" It's just a couple. We can still win this war. It's insane. Samson wasn't insane when he pulled down the temple. These new Samsons, I think they are insane. So when reason is faced with that, we're kind of in uncharted waters. Maybe I've noticed now that we're in these times I've been talking about for most of my life, is that you can't really know the ways through them until you're in them. Then things pop up that you wouldn't see before you were in these times, because the need to survive, the need to is there. And I think even in mad people who wanted, I mean, in a way, I saw that happening in the way that Israel responded to the Iranian missile strike. Uh, and they just kind of let it go off like a whimper. Let's go to the other moment. But actually, there is another thing that may have happened. I'm not sure it happened, but there's a lot of there. Even though really good people have uh, have brought up really good arguments to show that it's bunk, but they might have. I'm sorry, I'm taking so long, but to get you your question, but the this is really something if it's true, and I hope it isn't. I'm seeking to refute it, but there's some weird parts of it that I don't know. Pepe Escobar is a really good source, an international journalist from Brazil. I've been following him for years. He's a very good source. He's also an interesting guy, a man who has a sense of humor even in this stuff. I try to live up to that. And um, he got he has sources in Asia that he's cultivated for 30 years. And he says that in Asia, people of these kind of sources over 30 years, they don't lie to you. They tell you what's what. So that's he contends it's a relationship that's so ironclad, tested for 30 years. His sources. One is a very large Asian country, so I think it's obviously somebody in China, and some lesser Asian. And I write about this in detail in with all sides giving their chance to talk about for or against this. But what may have happened is that the Israelis were planning a, a strike back that would be a show of force that would put terror back in the hearts of people, because Israel lost with that missile strike when Iran responded to them hitting the embassy, which is an attack on Iran's sovereign properties. That's what an embassy is. So as Iran always took the asymmetrical stuff and bore it with great patience and resolve. But when they hit those generals and all that in Damascus, I mean, I know how the Iranians are. They said, well, that's our red line. You just crossed it, so we will strike back. And like a lot of people were surprised, well, why are you striking back about this? Well, I had to remind people in my writings that, well, this has always been Iran's view. Even the alternative media people, well, why are they doing this? I said, no, no, they've always said if you directly, openly as a state attack our airspace and our land, we'll go immediately at war with you. And Trump almost tried that 3 times. You know, he's only by the gift of his. I mean, people say, oh, he didn't start a new war. He tried really hard because he was listening to all these people he channels around him that were like Bolton and stuff who are mad hatters. And the greatest danger with Trump, I mean, I like Trump, but his greatest danger is he's a wide open channel. So and the deep state understands that. So they're going to try to insinuate again people that will influence him to do their bidding, not his or the American people. I think it happened a little bit again with the way he just kind of embraced all the things that Mike Johnson was doing to avoid America throwing all this money out of a losing war. And that so he was fully behind that. So that was another one of those moments where Trump was channeling somebody else but himself. And so the um it it is anyway, it's time for you to ask your question.
How much of AI do you think Israel is using, especially during October 7th?
Well, unfortunately, way too much. In fact, AI, literally, the Israeli intelligence, they must have had some real salesmen, you know, somebody had such a deal, convince the government that they could do better surveillance and espionage with AI than with human beings. Absolutely proven false by what happened at the gates, at the barbed wire areas. And there was a there were these Israeli female soldiers that were picked because they were really intelligent, really good. You know, had that. You know, a lot of people don't talk about it a lot, but espionage and intelligence work also requires not just objective thinking, but subjective thinking. That's why the psychic program, when they announced the CIA after 2 decades, discovered that remote viewing and psychic stuff was bunk. Oh, that's when I giggled and said, well, I guess they found something because now they're saying it's all bunk and they'll forget about it. We've discontinued all that. No, they just started it. They proved it. That's how it works. And so these gals were the people stationed in those reinforced booths, which had the automatic machine gun on top. So they could be on their computer screens constantly looking. And if something happened, if somebody came too close to the border, the robot gun would shoot them. And they're seeing over 6 months that the Hamas has got built a little village that looks like one of their fortress kibbutzim, and they're training. I mean, they're openly doing. And then they were also watching for months these guys with hang gliders, motorized hang gliders, flying around inside Gaza area. And they were making note of this. You know, they're saying, look, we have some anomalies, and it looks like these people are planning something. They were watching them daily for 6 months. And what happened was the powers that be, believing in the salesman about the AI, what they would do is they would take the reports and let the computer decide whether there's a problem or not. And if the computer came up saying, no, no, that's not important. It was not, the Hamas people had an idea of what they were doing with AI. And so they were doing patterns that the computer didn't recognize as dangerous. And why do I say that? Because if it didn't do that, the Israelis would have come in on them. If they had their real human intelligence, they would have gone in and bombed that training camp, you know, shoot down the guys in the hang gliders. Well, why are men in hang gliders flying around in the air over Gaza if they're not going to fly over the wall? I mean, that's what a human would think. But, AI is artificial idiocy. It is not intelligent. It is people, the stupid people of the world who love it so much think that intellect is wisdom and intelligence. Intellect is just a, a facility of being able to count and multiply and do things, and it's a part of us. I mean, Napoleon Bonaparte had an IQ of 142. He was very bright in this regard, but he was a complete idiot to invade Russia. He, that he was not wise. He was not. He was proficient in the military arts. He was almost like a computer himself. I mean, he used to line up 6 or 7 guys with pens, feathered pens, and he would pace up and down. As Napoleon was always like this, and he would remember in his mind a half dozen different letters that he was writing to different parts of the empire, and he would go, okay, number 2 this, and then he walked down and he go, pick up where I said before, number 3 here, and he would go up and down pacing, and he'd managed to get 6 letters written and ready at once. And he didn't sleep much. He only slept about 2.5 hours a day, but he would take power naps even in the middle of a battle. He just dropped down on a bear. They pull out a bear rug and drop him down, and all his general staff is watching him and just go as for about 20 minutes as the Battle of Wagram is going, one of the biggest battles in the Napoleonic Wars against the Austrians. And he then spring up, and I mean, I actually do power naps a lot, even though I do sleep normally, mostly. But anyway, these girls, these women it was getting so bad that they um, broke the chain of command and actually hopped over the guy. I mean, this is the problem with the Israeli army and Israeli society. It's very macho male. Women are not, especially in the military. Women are, it's just the women. They're having fits. They're having, I'm afraid of something. I don't know what, they're women. That's a very strong in the Israeli IDF. And so that kind of prejudice was very much there. But the women were really seeing something. And since they were there in those little fortified places, and frankly, when the breakout happened, they were all mostly killed. Some of them became hostages. The woman that had the blood stains on her sweatpants and was kind of taken off, the famous shot of her being taken off into Gaza, she was one of them. And so some of them survived, but they're hostages. But most of the people that were combat or de combat in that first day, fighting and dying with the Palestinian guys attacking them, were these women. So they were sacrificed. So what finally happened is the day before all this happened, apparently they did finally have a meeting to look at what was really going on. And they just decided couldn't come to a decision. They said, oh, we'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll get together tomorrow and fix it. So really bad leadership. Really, at some point, if Israel survives this, Netanyahu and all those people, Gallant and all of those people should stand trial for what they did. They created the situation. They they were asleep at the switch, and AI had a big part of that. So, and the other thing that AI does, you have, I think it's called lavender or pink or something like that, and it's where they allowed a unliving mechanism, artificial intelligence, decide who lives and who dies in Gaza Strip. So they gave the program parameters, and they had a grid, all this really small grid where every house, every building was into the grid, and the AI would decide who lives and dies. How can you give a soulless machine the power of life and death? Well, maybe you don't think those people are they're as bad as the goyim, the Gentiles. I mean, I've been watching rabbis, the Sephardic rabbis, some of the chief rabbis, but not the Kabbalist rabbis. I don't follow this stuff, or the Torah rabbis that I know. But I watch these speeches where I mean, you surrender your own intelligence to AI because there's no intelligence in saying, oh, the goyim, the the Gentiles, God just built them to serve us and let them live long enough to serve us until we no longer need them. Watch this guy saying. And then the guy that's the number one rabbi that Netanyahu, mainstream rabbi Netanyahu associates with a lot, he was saying such racist, horrid, even worse stuff than the Nazis used to say about, oh, well, because these people are where they're not chosen like us, we are of a higher state, we are closer to God, and so because they're not human, it's not a crime. Yeah. Uh, so it's not surprising that the younger men of such men who had such fathers have no problem massacring, lining people up like the Nazis did. In fact, in some cases, they say, hey, that's a good idea. I mean, I've already quoted, Jabotinsky to you. He was like saying, although Hitler is odious to us, um, um, his, eradicating the Jews is a good idea. It's like,
I
I think
have
we'll
a
take
lot.
the idea. We don't like Hitler, but we can use that idea because we are really here to clear those people out and take their land because we are higher and they are not human. So the dehumanization of people, which is always a very fundamental thing in racism, and even somewhat of the dehumanization of women who are trying to really seeing something is happening on the line. It's not. I think if Hitler had AI and the Nazis, they probably would have surrendered to AI as a more
Mhm.
efficient way to do it. I think anybody who gets lost in the horrors of racism and thinking that they belong to a higher species of humans than everybody else is open season. In a way, they've already surrendered their intelligence to something dark and stupid and unliving. I think they would gravitate towards making a golem,
Mhm.
making a golem out of mud, not out of mud, but out of circuitries. And so then, as Elon Musk warned about AI famously, and then summon the demon, which is a thing that the demons that I see truly rising in the world is beyond inhuman. It's not human at all. It is a soulless mechanism masquerading as an illusion of being like a human and applying many of the worst traits of human habit. So this lavender thing, what it did is literally the computer decided that anything that moved down there was to be killed. So it didn't differentiate between what might have been it had this idea of the program was, okay, um, if we do find if we do find someone we think is part of Hamas, which is a silly program to put in a computer because, yes, of course, everybody knows Hamas around. That doesn't mean that they're involved. That doesn't mean they're all. It's like this idea, if it's this 1-0 binary thing. Oh, if you talk to a Hamas leader, well, you kill them too. Oh, because the Hamas leader must be killed, whether he's there or not, blow up the whole refugee camp. So that was stuff they just sat back and let the computers do that and didn't monitor the computers. And then the whole world got outraged. And I don't think those guys were expecting that. Just
Well,
like they weren't expecting the breakout that the Hamas people were literally saw because they did things and the computer didn't. get all over them. They said, my God, they're not programming this right. So it's this random thing. It doesn't want to compute. It has this other bias that it's following, and we're not following it. So I mean, that's pretty clever. I mean, they just figured out this, and and then it's amazing.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. One
I
is that
know.
one is that there is a philosophical rabbinical concept with machines, and it goes back to machine matzah versus handmade matzah.
Mm,
Okay,
mm,
and the question that the rabbis had were, if you turn a machine on and a machine is doing something that a human should be doing,
mm.
can you impart intent through pushing the button and the machine doing its thing? The end result was that they concluded that you cannot
Yeah.
impart intent in a machine.
No, you can't.
Now, but here's the rub.
Have to be alive.
Yeah, but there's a lot of complexity with
Right.
this. So follow my logic here.
Yeah, I will.
Then let's say we teleport back to the 1940s during the Holocaust, and they line a bunch of Jews into a gas chamber. Can a officer that's running the camp impart intent by pushing a button that will lead to the extermination of these individuals in the gas chamber by initiating this gas? Because if you cannot impart intent into a machine,
Yeah.
then therefore the officer has not done a war crime.
Yeah, well,
So
that's the thing. Well,
here's
no, let me. I won't be long, but this problem came up. This problem came up in the beginning. At the beginning, the Germans were shooting, and what was happening, and Himmler was very concerned about it because even Nazis faced daily with murdering people, and then he had his moment where he was observing them doing it, and some brain hit him in the chin, and he almost fainted in front of his men, and that was a big change for him. So he sat everybody down, and this is how he reasoned it out. He said, no one will be able to understand this terrible work we must do to provide and purify a better world. We are here, and here's the inhumanity of it, reasoning, these are bed bugs, and we have to eradicate them to make a healthy world. And he actually became a force to dehumanize the system. They realized that the men were losing; they were going to have a nervous breakdown. They're going mad. Actually, a little of that was shown in Schindler's List when they were burning the bodies they dug up, and there were some of the Nazi guys were just going. Yeah, that was happening in the beginning too, and so he did it. The motivation was to protect his men from having nervous breakdowns because it was unnatural. So their decision was, let's turn it industrial. Let's give it to the machines. Let's give it to the Zyklon B. Let's build the showers that are closed, so we just move the naked people in and we close the doors, and then there'll be one guy who all he's doing is shaking a little Zyklon B down the hole on the roof, and the reaction happens. And some of them like to just walk away and not hear all the people screaming and crying. But their way of taking the human out of it, but making it even more brutal, um, was to, throw the cyclone in, walk away, watch the clock. Okay, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. Okay. And then they had the Jews prisoners do the dirty work of dragging all the bodies out, taking them out in the fields and burning them into fat fields, or using the oven. Ovens were not that efficient. So, so, um, so yeah, so that's how the Nazis save their humanity by giving it to the machine.
Right, but the thing is that if you, all right, so take it
Okay.
from another direction.
Mhm.
Someone shoots a gun. Did the
Mhm.
gun kill or did the person kill? Because if you cannot impart intent into a machine and you can absolve yourself from the act, then therefore a person does not kill through anything that is mechanized.
And that is a and that is how
So,
criminality
so
reasons its monstrousness.
well, yeah, or no, that's a
It's
good
a
point.
way to, it's a clever way to blame the machine, like people say. And it really upsets people when actually the Second Amendment people are right. No gun has ever murdered anybody. It's a person holding it and using it. No atomic bomb sitting in its bunker is ever going to start World War III. It's just a bomb. But if the man uses it as a tool, then he is responsible. So it's a false premise to take the rabbis are right. The machine cannot do it. And if the man is making the machine do it, he is still responsible. He's just tricking himself, being too clever. He's being a criminal mind. Criminal minds always work it out very narcissistically as well. Yeah, I robbed that lady because I need that money more than she does. Very narcissistic. It's like, yeah, we got to eradicate all these people because they're bed bugs, and we're human. And they'll even admit, yes, this is terrible. Himmler was saying, yeah, what we're doing is terrible, and you'll never even see commiserating with them. We'll never be able to tell our families, our kids, we are a band of brothers that has to keep this terrible secret till the end of our days. But it was a necessary evil. That's how criminal minds work out
Mm,
their their mischief.
mm. Or you can even go even further with the Schroeder's cat.
Mm,
All right. All right. There's a probability that you may kill the cat when you shoot the gun, but you don't know until you open up the box. So,
that's being
you
tricky,
impart
even
intent.
deeper layer of trickiness.
Right. No, but right. But then, all right. Now to go back to the Golan, which I totally agree with you with this whole silicon versus the dust, and AI is a new type of golem.
Yeah.
All right. So, what is interesting with the story that I believe the story starts in Prague. I
Hmm.
think that's right. It's made to protect the city, but then it gets out of control,
Yeah.
and then the people have to try to destroy it,
Yeah.
right?
The variation of
So
Frankenstein's monster.
yeah, no, I think Frankenstein's actually coming from that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was her name that wrote
Maria, I think
Frankenstein?
Maria Shelley.
Was she Jewish? Or not?
I don't know, actually.
She was Jewish. She must have gotten that story from the Golem. I mean, because it's so
Oh,
close to it.
you
It must have been.
I have seen a documentary where they point that, yeah, that they said that it looked like she got it from the Golem. Yeah, I think she did. I think that was
Yeah,
her
that's
catalyst.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
I know
it's a
Shelley, I don't know. That was her, not her married name. That was not her maiden name. She was married to Shelley, the poet. He might have been Jewish. I don't know. I have to check that, but I don't know if she was.
it's so close to the story, and
Oh
but
yeah,
the
yeah.
thing, yeah. So
And the Golem is older, is an older story, certainly than Mary Shelley in 1816. So I mean, when did the Golem story come out first?
I want to say 12th century,
Yeah.
something like
So
that.
yeah. So there you go. I mean, yeah.
12th or
Because the
13th
Golem,
century.
before Frankenstein, the Golem was the only kind of monster that yeah.
Yeah. So all right. So they create. So if what you do, if the conclusion is what you do, if your actions develop something that can harm someone, then you should be responsible for those actions. And it goes back to a very simple. It's one of the first things that someone studies in Talmud, John,
Mhm.
is if you dig a pit and someone falls in it, you're at fault.
Yeah.
It's that simple. There was I saw a video, I think it was this morning or yesterday, where it was a Google employee that ex-Google employee that was part of the artificial intelligence team. Somehow, some way, she knew about lavender. I don't know if she worked on lavender or she did something tangential for lavender at Google. I don't know. But
Yeah.
the thing is that I, I, I don't think there's enough people talking about this. At least I haven't seen this.
It's on
People talking
alternative
about.
media a lot, but it's not enough. It's not as much. I mean, I saw the grid. I saw
But
how they do it.
right, but
Yeah.
I think that there needs to be more discussion about what Google is doing,
Hmm.
how they're being involved in the development of lavender, and how the Israelis are using it in their war effort against Gazans.
Mhm.
Because I think that story explains some of the relationship between the Biden administration and the Israeli administration. Because I think what's happening in Israel with this war is it's testing out AI in the battlefield. That this is like real world. It's different when you're out in the fields of Nevada and you're kind of testing it out in a
Well,
laboratory kind of setting
always war
versus
is,
a
yeah.
real battle,
Yeah,
real
well, this
warfare.
is always true, especially in modern warfare. I mean, it's literally, I mean, the Russians started this war and they hadn't fought a war in decades. And they really screwed up at the beginning. That's where they lost most of the people they died in this war. And but the Russians have this quality that I wish was in more people's. They learn from their mistakes. They admit they make a mistake, they learn, and then they adapt. And now, 2 years later, we've got an army that's way decades ahead of understanding warfare and technology and stuff in war than even NATO and the United States. They're 20 years ahead of us in nuclear armaments and delivery systems because we in 2002 George W. Bush started this whole thing that Trump and Obama and everybody's started deconstructing all the missile treaties, INF and all of that actually kept World War III going nuclear coming. And so Putin asked them, was, well, okay, now, so what you're saying is you're not going to have a problem with us if we just go and do our own thing and create our own deterrence? I said, no, this is fine. You go, it's no problem. Not really thinking deep about what he was trying to say. And so what Russians realize is, oh, they think that we're going to do what we did, the Soviet Union did, that we're going to match them dollar to ruble, and they do something, and of course that broke our economy because America, making dollars could always spend their way out of any problem until now. So, so what the Russians did is they said, because their military industrial complex is purpose based, not profit based, and the purpose is secondary or tertiary, which has been completely exposed. And that's why everybody is not buying US weapons anymore, because we've seen how they're all crap, because they break down, and that means they get lots of maintenance, heavy maintenance, which has to go back the money to the military industrial complex. So they're not built to win a war, because the military industrial complex never imagined that they would fight a big war like World War II again. The Russians understood that they would, because they are. And so what they did, on a budget of 70 billion a year, and even lower during the last decades or so, they created a more efficient, capable, workable military instruments, rugged, not overly trying to, shoot down a plane and make eggs. The problem with the F-35 is it tries to make eggs, fly, use nuclear bombs, and go and buy your wife a dress. It's like it's got too many complexities to it, and that's why the F-35, there's only about 28% of them that are actually workable. All the rest are in different stages of being fixed. You can't win a war with that. And so the so you know, we believe the Bush people don't believe that, oh, the Russians are dumb, stupid Slavs, and they're going to go and they're just going to repeat the mistakes that they did in the Cold War, and we'll break them economically doing that. I mean, the same thing happened when some sanctions were hit on Russia in 2014, when the second Cold War started. The Russians went, we're eventually going to have a war, economic and military, with the NATO. They realize that they have no reverse gear. They had to finally understand that. And so over those 8 years, the Russians quietly created financial siege walls in their economy, because they could do that with the advantage of being the ruble was not an international currency, but very much used within Russia. And since they are a commodity nation, the Saudi Arabia of commodities, they can take care of themselves. And they had a mutual interest for survival and concord with the Chinese, who needs lots of commodities. So immediately when the war started, the Cold War started, a day after the sanctions on the farming uh, produce of Russia happened, that's when they realized, okay, we'll just make it all ourselves and be self-sufficient. We'll stop buying European farm goods. We'll just make our goods better. And they did it. And at the same time, he went immediately to Z in China, and created a $300 billion deal that was the beginning of the move east of oil and gas to Asia. And when it happened, one of my sagest articles, I said, I'm going to tell you that no one's looking at this, but if they look back in history, they're going to say this was the moment when the shift from the West began to the East, and it will change everyone's lives. And it did. And so, so that's we have to learn from one's mistakes. Hubris, don't excuse yourself and try to kind of BS your way out of the responsibility of digging a hole and somebody falling into it. Um, it is whatever you can use, as Einstein found out, whatever you can use to bring peace to the world can also be used to destroy it. I mean, Einstein was the one of the scientists in that list of scientists that sent a letter to FDR talking about working on an atomic weapon. I understand it, because Hitler and Heisenberg, I think, they were working on it too. And I understand the logic of it. If these people who are suicidally, I mean, killing people and genocide of our people, well, they're really genocide on the Slavs, genocide on anybody that isn't Aryan. You want to give them a bomb that could blow up a city with one bomb? And so they pressed Roosevelt, presuming that Roosevelt and the people that were in Washington were better people than the bureaucrats and politicians in Germany. And it turned out that they exploited the bomb. Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a crime, because the Japanese, for 6 months since Berlin fell, had been in back channels trying to get a way out to end the Japanese theater of World War II. They knew they had lost. And so there was all this back channel stuff going on with the Japanese government. And they only had one condition. They were ready to unconditionally do everything else that the Americans wanted, but they said, leave our emperor on his throne. To try and explain how that was so important to us. It would be like, leave our Kabbalist rabbis alone. You know, it was like, if it was an Israeli thing, it's just like, and so, but they didn't do it because a new danger was looming. Stalin was not, the breakup of the alliance was happening. And when the war was over in Germany, the Truman, he wrote about it. He wanted to light off some of the atomic bombs so that Stalin would know that we had them and he didn't, so he better behave. unfortunately for the Americans, I think even Fermi and some of the other people in the Manhattan Project were already sending information to the Soviets. Not so much because they were traitors. They were afraid that one nation with the atomic bomb would be evil. That they, when there's no consequence if you can just bomb anybody you want. And the proof of the pudding is if we were really not going to do that, then we would have done this. We would have only made a bomb after using them in Japan. And then if anyone else made a bomb, we'd make two. And if, you know, and just keep it. But we were past or around near 500 atomic weapons we'd already built by the time the Russians lit off their first atomic bomb. So what are you doing with 500 and nobody else has them and nobody's threatening you? And you're really working to maybe you'll have thousands of them. And then if nobody discovers how to make it, then you can rule the world. If you don't like somebody, you threaten to drop a nuke on them. I mean, this is already in nuclear doctrine. And actually, Bush put it in and Obama made it worse. He made it absolutely clear in nuclear doctrine that America reserves the right to unilaterally use a nuke on a non-nuclear nation for whatever reason it requires. So, you know, there's some real criminal use of something that could light the world and power the world. And so Einstein, it was the greatest mistake of his life, he said. And he said, if there ever is such a thing as reincarnation, I hope I don't come back as a scientist. I hope I come back as a plumber. Now, he's Pisces, so I laugh astrologically because it would be kind of something like I'll work with water and pipes, you know, water sign. And so, and if there's a flood, you know, I'll fix it. And so he said that. And so he was, wisdom comes when you face your mistakes and then you don't beat yourself into schuldig and guilt and all that. Guilt is useless. Guilt is just a sinkhole to where you flagellate yourself, and it's just another kind of ego act, and it does not grow you. But Osho used to say, guilt is negative, it's bad, but to be ashamed is not guilt. It's all acknowledging in the shame in this way. Says, well, I did that. I dug that hole and that kid fell in and hurt himself. I'm ashamed of that. I made a mistake, but what I can only do, I can't help reverse it. Maybe I can help the kid if he hurt himself, help pay for his medical bills or something like that. But even if something you do gets somebody killed, guilt and guilt ridden is going to kill another person's life, yours. Be ashamed in this way. Be like, it was my unconsciousness that caused this person to die. I will strive to live consciously and learn from my mistakes. It's positive. So this is the positive side, guilt, being ashamed, but not to be flat, but just like on your own, not because somebody tells you you should be ashamed. You just say, I really screwed up and I'm responsible for that. And then it just inspires you to rise above your ignorance. That's my kind of being ashamed that I'm talking about. And guilt has nothing to do to help. There should be no guilt about anything. Shamedness, yes.
Quick question. Do you think parents should be accused of wrongdoing if their child does something wrong? So they, obviously the mother and the father, they procreate and they have this child. All right. And let's say the child ends up becoming Jeffrey Dahmer. All right. Is it the fault of the parents?
Well, Jeffrey Dahmer,
Because they created something,
yes.
just like mankind creates a machine, right? And let's say the machine can decide to turn itself on or off and make matzah, right?
Mhm. Right.
Right? All right. Well, their kid could decide to, turn on and off a gun and hurt someone or whatever. So I mean, you know, there must be a point. The bigger question here, the philosophical question is there must be a delineation where people that make something, either biological or mechanical or some hybrid of it, um, are absolved from any wrongdoing. There, how many degrees of separation, or you've seen these famous mazes where
Yeah.
you push a ball and it hits a stick that hits a little car
Yeah.
that hits a
Yeah.
swing that
I forget the
how
guy's
many.
name. He used to make those.
Yeah, but
Started with a
but how
G.
many, degrees of separation is is needed to decide, okay, the maker, whoever the maker is, either the celestial maker or one of us, a human, um is not, isn't responsible for the actions of the system,
Well,
you know
first, now I have a complicated karma has come home to Mr. Hogue. Since I kind of put you through the ringer with that, now it's my turn. Um, this is a very important thing, because this is kind of what I'm planning to write in a book about that's based on the prophecies of my teacher Osho, that will really look at what you've given me is a bush called troubles, unexpected consequences, and and these degrees of separations are a form of trying to solve the problem of a big gnarly bush by trimming it down. The the levels of step are like leaves. You snip, snip, snip. Problem is, when you prune a tree, for one leaf you snip, you have 5 more. Because the issue really has to go back to the root, where you cut the whole tree down, tree of troubles, by a new understanding. It is such a challenge, Himalayan challenge, as Osho would say, because the understanding is that you first have to go back to education and see how, in the name of educate, which means to draw out, no education is doing that. We are dumping in a whole lot of stuff from other people, and we're being taught to think that these things that we didn't even ask for as children, didn't even have a chance to, given a time to ask the questions ourselves. We are forced by other people, because there's no time for us to do that, they think, to shape a person. Education is not shaping a person. Education is drawing out the mystery of eternity, that this person in new form is literally the gift brought into our world of appearances and change, that changeless, bright innocence. So that's fundamental in the structuring of laws. And it's a Herculean task that I will write about a lot, because I've been thinking about this kind of stuff for most of my life, actually, in childish ways, and then as a youth, and then as a mature man, now in the seasoning of the approach of age, and which has its blessings too, of maturity. The the issue should be, um, you have to create a world where the individual is respected, and where the child is, not forced to lose its wild, innocent childishness. Now, um, We'll probably go. We'll talk a little about it today, but I think this is a topic we could talk a lot about in other shows because it's actually fundamental. It's cutting to the root is the only way a problem can be solved. Otherwise, we've all history is just a sorry show of everybody doing their best to prune a tree of troubles that just gets more strong and not cutting it at the root. So it's about, we first have to seek and find what is the root of programming? What is the root of people um, being programmed by society and by religions? Even atheism is a religion, uh, and and structuring a world on belief, which is believing in something you can't really prove or disprove, but through the authority of the person who says, well, I know Jesus meant this, and Jesus lived, and you have to have faith in me. Well, um, why? The child would ask, why? Well, it's because you wear slippers and you wear a dress and a pointy hat. Does that make you some special? Did you ever walk with Jesus Christ? Did you know that he never knew himself by that name that all you Christians call him? You say, hey, Jesus, he wouldn't turn around. He'd keep walking away with his disciples because Jesus didn't exist in his life. He's Yeshua, Joshua, you know, and he never was called Christ or Jesus. So, so So again, what's the example of that is that our education teaches us to handle unconsciously, borrow other people's givens that are against another set of people's givens. And and then that causes wars and discord. Um, the the cycle of war is because peace isn't really peace. It's a time preparing for war. I mean, I call it the will to catharsis is what wars were working well with until mutually assured destruction happened, where we now had weapons that if you use them, you wipe everybody out. So you can't do big world wars anymore. Now, time has passed. The Cold War I lived in is long forgotten. I have not forgotten it. And now we're in this new Cold War where our leaders and the lead have completely forgotten what it was like every day when you woke up in the Cold War I grew up in. You always woke up saying, oh, we're all still here. And there were 72,000 nuclear weapons in the 80s at the peak of it. We could blow up the world 1,000 times over. So it was a real thing. And it was the sword of Damocles hovering over every human head, Soviet or Western or capitalist or communist. And and it is the closest thing in life that I've ever seen where the Old Testament, I fear the Lord, was literally applicable to this. Fear the Lord God of mad, mutually assured atomic destruction. I just wrote recently an article, my last Hogue prophecy, it reports about it. I do not fear God, but I fear the God mad, M-A-D, of nuclear destruction. And it's a healthy fear. We've lost that fear. We don't even know. It's almost like nuclear bombs are like a kid that reaches out at a pretty flame and he burns his hand. We've gotten to the point of a child who doesn't even know. Most people don't even think about it. If you've got leaders who don't think about it, you're going to have a nuclear war. And we probably are going to have one. Hopefully, the shock of sticking the hand in the nuclear flame may be enough to shock the world and step back. But I think we're going to have a nuclear war because these people, because they have not been educated, they are the end sum total of trying to trim the tree of troubles. They only need They can only just keep trimming. They keep going forward. They won't step back and look at the whole tree and notice where it's nourished in the ground and cut it from there. And what is that grounding? That grounding is in a false ego persona. And that persona is our personality, so that we can be with everybody else in their personalities. It means mask. Where this is my face, society puts this, how I can do it. I can't do it. Anyway, I was going to do my hands upside down.
It's like
Here's my mask. Here's my mask. Hello, I'm John Hogue. I never had a name. I got a name. I got everything that I even think that I never even thought about when I was born. And now I want to find that child that I was before. The law has to be based on that. Now, this is a huge oceanic subject that I'm going to possibly write 300-400-page books on, 3 volumes. I'm thinking just, I'll distill it into one book because, it won't attract people if it's a mass. I mean, I'll do the Nostradamus project that way because it's Nostradamus. You always expect it's going to be a big volume. It's going to be 3 volumes, probably each of them 800 or 900 pages. But it's a history of the future, so it's a big future, past, present, and future. So the best thing I can do or suggest in this is talk about the things that people, just because of their givens, they never even think about, and that is that it literally starts at birth, and how we do not draw out the Buddha, the Christ consciousness, the inner spirit of Jehovah in us that we come with. We cloak it, we dress it, we cover it in things that are transitory. They're needed. And, we're living, anyone that plays in the cosmic game of existence, if we come as the eternal now in a form, we're going to have to learn how to live in this form, and with the dialectical views. This is, we visit this. We're like the shape of a wave that's been imposed upon the ocean. But the way we train people, and this is fundamental to why everything doesn't really work, it tries, everybody, even Hitler thought he was doing good. Nobody thinks they're doing evil. And if they discover they've done evil, they can argue that it was programmed upon them. So the question in the oceanic metaphor is, how do we draw out the ocean and not forget the ocean for the sake of the shape of the rising wave in a new life on the surface of it? And the wave is real, but it's transitory. The ocean is eternity. How do we draw education so that the morality is that of eternal love, eternal consciousness, innocence? How do we base a system on that? Now it can only be done one individual at a time. It can only be done one person at a time. You never see an army of Moseses. You never see an army of Ezekiels. You never see an army of Christs or Buddhas. They're one person. Moses comes alone from the mountain with the tablets. I have 15 commandments. I have 10 commandments. Sorry, I had to do it. Mel Brooks one. uh, so it's really the most important issue, I think, because if everybody gets out of the bed of the mystery before life on the wrong foot, or they're told, not that foot, and it's the wrong foot, and because they're innocent, they step out of the bed on the wrong foot, told that it's the right foot. and then it all gets worse after that. And so that is my rather unorthodox view of how to fix it. And this is just a piece of what because I've been all my life, even as a child, the Cuban Missile Crisis shocked it into me. I mean, I've learned that even bad things can be an opportunity to grow in wisdom. And the Cuban Missile Crisis really shook me up. And it made me at a very young age aware that I wanted to know what the world was doing and why. And so as a kid, I started to watch news like a news junkie. And when it was just the evening news and other things, I started reading. I wondered why I got into history and saw how history is always repeating itself, it seems, or rhyming, or, new religions, new things to fight, new names for God to go to religious wars with. And yet it seems like something's missing, and what's happening is it's exponentially getting more complicated, the trees getting more gnarly, and seem to be reaching a singularity in this year, in the next 5 months, that could either see us blow it all up, or at the point of our collective species death being threatened, our life as a species being threatened. It could take us to another place where we do not commit auto-suicide. I mean, I think I've spoken to you in earlier shows about how I faced suicide. I was going to kill myself, throw myself off a cliff. My book, if people want to know the whole detail, is a book that was inspired by the suicide of Anthony Bourdain, who I never knew, but I learned so much about him watching his shows over the years. I loved him, flaws and all. Well, he was a man who really contemplated on suicide, and I said, the people who just in a sudden fit kill themselves, that's a mundane suicide. But the people who really feel it approaching and really are asking the question Hamlet asked, where he's at the cliff, ready to throw himself into the ocean and the rocks, to be or not to be. That is the question. And this is an essential question. His little soliloquy there is remarkable. To bear the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and then he resolves it. He was going to commit suicide. That's what that moment, that it was getting overwhelming, seeing his father's ghost and all that, and he was ready to jump off the cliff. Well, maybe the human race on a certain level, when they're really faced with it, when it isn't a movie anymore, when it really is, we're on the edge, and the whole human race is going to take a jump. Now, what I did when I was ready to take the edges, I thought, I sensed this incredible power of death and life becoming one, almost as if they were coming together like people making love. It was like they death and life were intimately the same in their uniqueness. They shared that. And it was so powerful that I decided to sit underneath a little young silver dollar gum tree, eucalyptus tree, and sit there for a moment before I went over the edge, because I knew that if I resolved not to jump over the edge, this would disappear. It only existed because I really was going to kill myself. So I just wanted to savor this thing before I went over. And then some energy came up through the roots of the trees into my spine and threw me onto my face into the crabgrass. And I cried my eyes out. I cried a lot of suffering and tears until it was very quiet. And it felt like the whole existence was wanting to just take me in its warm blanket after all that crying and love me. And I heard the of and something like was whispering, and I turned around as I'm laying on my face, and there was the little silver dollar tree in the wind. Beautiful wind came up, and then the sky was filled with deep dark blue with beautiful wisps of Southern California's cirrus clouds. And across from San Pedro, 23 miles across, veiled in a misty gown, were the changing colors of Santa Catalina Island, changing the sunshine. I'd basically come back from India after meeting Osho, and I'm in Orange and a mala, and I'm a sannyasam now, and Sanskrit name, but I couldn't see how I could fit in this world anymore. So what had triggered it is that I realized that suicide is a form of absolute freedom and responsibility. And so it was almost like the message was, well, you're free. If you want to die now, you can die. Just do it. And so I decided to do it. And then this other thing happened that wouldn't have happened if I had done that. And so I, well, I was sitting with it. And then what happened was I had what Osho used to call, I think I had what he used to call a spiritual suicide. Now, that's a kind of shocking phrase. And unfortunately, a lot of people, when they see my book, because it's entitled Anthony Bourdain and the Choice Between Mundane and Spiritual Suicide, a personal reflection by John Hogue. Um, I think it's one of my best books, but it's a lot of people shy away from it because, and I even say in the opening, I say, look, I define what spiritual suicide is. Don't think, you're killing the spirit. No, the spirit can't be killed. That's not what it is. Mundane suicide is when you, through a reaction of not getting what you want in the world, you destroy your body because you think that will end the pain and all that. A spiritual suicide is where you aim to do that. But because of some grace, some thing that happens you were planning for, like me sitting at the tree, you watch your misery and identity fall off that cliff, and your spirit remains. Now, it's like chopping down a tree of misery. It goes crashing in front of your feet, and you're sitting there. And for ever since that happened in 1981, I have been watching the tree of misery and identity slowly rotting away before me, very slowly. The tree's still green, it still looks like it's there, but it's a connection to me was broken that day. And it's taken me 40 years to watch in reality that misery and identity rot away, using this tree metaphor. So, that I mean, I would feel after that if I felt suicidal, I wouldn't cross the line anymore because I I dipped into it. So this book describes all of that and describes the process because I think when I think it's an act of intelligence when a person reaches a point of really saying like Hamlet, to be or not to be. That is the question. So a law should have that fundamentally in it, a code of law and behavior. Ultimately, what is needed, which is not so abstract, but still, every individual needs to rediscover their lost innocence. And it's not a quantitative thing, it's a qualitative thing. You can't solve the world's problems because consciousness is a quality. You can become conscious though. That actually may solve it because all this darkness is descending on the world is because the human race, not really aware of it, is in collective manner, is reaching a place where the human race must evolve or the classroom ends. And because there's a feeling of some great reckoning, and people been feeling, they've been talking to me about it for the last 20 years, but it's been really, now it's really big. And I tell them, no, this is something you may not be conscious of why it's happening, but yes, the whole human race is perched on a choice of destiny, whether it continues to evolve or dies out. and it continues to be open to change, or it's so locked in its cage of familiarity, even though it's a cage. It would rather die in the cage or drop dead from fear of change, of leaving the cage and then being in an unknown world where you're free, but you don't have your familiar miseries, you don't have your familiar dogmas. You don't have the strange security that, well, like people in the Bastille prison when the Bastille was liberated and they're dragging these poor 11 people that were there in chains for decades. They wanted to come back. They said, "Don't let this is my home. I know this place. It's hell, but I know this place. I don't want to go out in the light into the streets of Paris. Leave me alone. Let me chain me back up to the wall." Well, that's what happens. We That's what's happening. It's in many prophecies. The Hopis talk about it in the Great Purification by Fire is what we are actually experiencing right now. It started in the 2020s. And the fire can be three possible things. It can be the fire of consciousness, the light of fire of consciousness awakening in us, or and that could be triggered by the danger of the fire of thermonuclear war looming and the slower catastrophe, which is much more hard to recognize because now the people that are fighting on both sides of the argument issue are completely missing the point of what's really going on. That is that we are in a sixth mass extinction phase in this history of Earth, otherwise known as the climate changing. We can argue which way the climate is changing, whether it's human induced or not. I've been following this issue since over 50 years. And global warming is real. But the people who are denying it and the people who've decided to be puritanical inquisitors of it are both missing the point. I frankly trust the people who don't believe in it. There's a chance with them. These green people, these woke green people, they're just, I mean, they're Greta Thunberg immature. They're not, they have ideas of to change the thing and they don't even know the science of changing anything. They just believe in magic fairy tales and narwhals or unicorns. And their whole attention to how to solve it is to first destroy all the fossil fuel industries, turn off the nuclear power, and then without any energy or industry to be able to build or even scientifically research alternative reason things that really work, that actually replace fossil fuels when they've been tested over a long period of time to do what fossil fuels do, and that is cheap, infinite, affordable energy. Not, I turn on the switch and it works. I don't turn on the switch and wait for my car for a half a day to turn on. I mean, you've got to know what the problem is. The problem is not fossil fuels. The problem is not that at all. It is CO2 emissions. The oil industries have not even tried to sequester carbon. There's beginning, but you don't have to take a successful energy source. You have to stop bleeding out the CO2. You have to find a way to trap it or return it to the earth. Or so it's and nuclear power, you can make it safer. There's things that are happening that we could have started in 1962, the thorium reactors. They don't melt down. They use rock salt to make power. You just take a little fissionable material, and we've got mountains of it. It can be spent fission. That triggers the nuclear event. And when it eats up, it dissolved. And if you don't feed a little more, the rock salt cools down and the nuclear reaction ends. You can't build bombs with it. That's why it didn't become ubiquitous all over the world. Because at that time in 62, everybody was wondering if they wanted to bomb. So you can't make nuclear weapons out of it. So it's really not possible. You can try, but it's not. So it doesn't melt down, doesn't have a China syndrome. You don't have to have it next to water. You don't have any rods to keep underwater until if they get dry, then they suddenly start a reaction. It doesn't work that way. So anyway, there are solutions, and I have a book about that I'm also working on, where we really look at the solutions and get it out of the hands of all these fools that are, these people are now making a living saying, "Oh, climate change is a hoax," and they're missing a lot of the data. They don't want, it's becoming religious on either side. It's religious fanaticism is not going to solve this problem, which if we survive a causing ourselves a thermonuclear war, this creeping catastrophe is going to define the 21st century and our future survival. So um, it must be getting late there in New York. I'm trying to keep you up.
Well, before we go, John, I want to inform the audience again to make sure that you click the link. It'll take you to John's website. You'll be able to buy his periodical. He sends the periodical biweekly, I believe, or
Well, it's kind of
bi-monthly.
whenever I can get it out because the times like it's been about every 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's big. It's because of the times, but it's always coming out, and this is about bi-monthly. I would say expected every month. Yeah, actually, this would be a good time to finish the story hours ago that I didn't tell,
Go
the
ahead.
Akbar story.
Mm.
I will finish it
Uh,
on this quick. Emperor Akbar had purchased beautiful black swans from the Waysak Lake in Tibet. And these swans were going to be shipped out of Tibet. And so he made an announcement to the capital because people used to believe that swans could, when they drink water with milk in it, they were able to take the milk out and leave the water when they pee or something like that. So it was just a myth, but it was kind of a poetic myth. And so his idea was he was going to build a huge pond. And what he needed, though, was enough people to bring milk to turn it white so that when the swans were ceremoniously brought in, they would have their meal. So the edict went out. All castes of the nation, the untouchables, the mercantiles, the warriors, and everybody, all have to, after darkness begins, come up to this pond in front of the temple, in front of the palace, with a cup of milk and pour it in. So Birbal and Akbar are on the veranda looking down at all the darkness and hearing all the slosh, 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 and all the multitudes splashing stuff into the pond. And Akbar is very satisfied with himself. He's saying, "Wow, the people are really coming. It's going to be beautiful." And Birbal just starts cracking up. He just goes, "Oh, my beloved emperor, you do not understand human nature. I predict that tomorrow morning at sunrise, when you and I walk to that pond, there will not be a drop of milk in it. It will all be water." And so, all right, done. If we'll have a bet. So we walked out the next morning. There was no milk. The Akbar was flabbergasted. He was like, "This is so. How do you explain this?" I said, "Listen, my my emperor, I have a plan. Take the guards out, get 100 people, make sure that from all the different castes, rich and poor, middle class, all of them, and then bring them one by one into a room where they have an audience with you and me. And I will ask them this question: why didn't you bring milk as ordered?" So after a while, became very clear why. And he said, and they'll, with maybe a few different words, they will basically say the same thing. So, and then this is what happened. They were sitting, and Akbar was amazed. He was saying whether they were princes or paupers, they came in saying, "Well, Emperor, I saw all these people that brought milk." And I was thinking, "Oh, wonderful," because They obviously can afford milk, or milk's kind of expensive, and it's so great to see that all these people are out there filling your pond. And so I just thought, if I just pour a little cup of water into it in the dark, it'll slosh like everybody else's cup, and no one will know.
So they watered it down.
Well, what
Oh,
happened is they all had the same idea.
yeah, yeah, and they all watered it down.
And that's what often happens. I mean, I have 10,000
Hmm.
people on a free newsletter list. And they like my free things. Every once in a while, I've got to say, this is how I make my living. If you really like it, could you give $5 a year? Or could you do an automatic payment through my PayPal, and where you just get one payment of like $5 or $10 per month? Or can you, if you feel like you feel better about doing it all in one show and worrying about it in 12 months, $60. And then if enough of you do this, then if you really like what you're, or confronted, or whatever, but you like to come back and watch what I'm doing, or you like to come back and read what I write, that's how you'll keep this going.
That's right.
So now your cup
So,
of milk matters, and only your cup of milk matters. And in a way, this is similar to what I'm saying about only your individuality matters, not the mass. We're taught to think in masses and mobs, which is an unconscious way of thinking. Only your existence matter. When I came out of that suicidal thing, I realized that existence regarded me as it regards everything unique and important and essential. That your own existence in this world is incredibly needed by existence. So, uh, because we're taught to think in mob think, one of the problems of that is that everybody thinks, well, somebody else is giving Mr. Hogue the cup of milk. I don't have to do it. And there isn't anybody else but you.
so the audience, please go to the description of this video and of the 11 other videos that we've done. Click that link. It'll take you to John's website. Please purchase the articles that he offers, his monthly subscription. And you also do readings. I've done a reading, it was almost 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I,
Wow.
I enjoyed it. I've known other people that have done it. So please sign up for a reading. It's an interesting conversation. It's a conversation, but you'll learn a lot, through these readings. But please click the link, take you to his website, and purchase the periodical and the other stuff that he offers. So thank you, John, for being on the show. We'll do this again and say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. I love you.
What was the Russian way of saying it? Mocha mocha.
Oh,
What was it?
poka poka.
Polka polka. All right, all right.
Poka.
Let me stop the recording.